#1 talk radio station in the Inland Empire.
To address today is the issue of the Brittany Griner release from Russia. Now, and she actually is a WNBA. For those who do not know, and I'm sure that most people already know that she was a WNBA player that had been actually playing basketball over in Russia during the off season, which is something that is often done by WNBA players, primarily because of the issue with salaries. Of course, in WNBA players, which has been a long uh, discussed issue about the fact that they aren't, paid very well. Often go during the off season and play internationally, and that's she had been playing. She was a Mercury center. She played for the Mercuries, and while she was going over to Moscow, where she played during the off season, on February the 17th of this year, uh, it is alleged that they discovered vape cartridges containing hashish oil in her luggage. And on August the 4th, she was sentenced to 9 years in a Russian prison. And recently, I guess December the 8th, she was released in a prisoner swap to return to the United States. During the time period that she had been in custody over there, eventually she was sent to what they call a Russian penal colony, where she was until the time of her actual release. So, as we address this one particular issue, as we look at the Brittany Griner case, there's a few things that I think that we can address right off the bat. I think number one is the issue of her conviction to begin with, the fact that she was over there and she received such a severe sentence for at least what we consider here in the United States, a very minor or mild infraction, or I shouldn't use the word infraction, but offense. Okay. Then the second thing I think that we have to address in this particular issue that's sparking a lot of controversy is the fact that she was released. However, there's other individuals that have been taken into custody or are actually in Russian custody, and this administration bartered an agreement regarding her as opposed to maybe some other individuals that were being held in custody. I think that's the second issue that people have brought up with regards to the Brittany Griner situation. So I think that we have Detective Reese joining us today. Are you there, Detective Reese?
Yeah, we're here, Cal. It's good to have you along.
All right, man. Great having you as well. So yeah,
happy holidays to everyone.
Oh, the same to you, and happy holidays to all the listeners as well. So Brittany Griner. And I'm going to ask you, Detective Reese. I guess the first thing that I want to address as we kind of unpack this whole issue is her conviction to begin with. I mean, there are those who argue that it was politically motivated, that she was kind of used as a pawn because this was like the beginning, obviously of the invasion, and that she was pretty much just a political pawn, right? And the fact that the 9-year sentence, which I'm assuming is probably what typically I think that the exposure for an offense like this, I think it was 10 years. I may be mistaken, but that's my understanding. And she ended up getting 9 years after, I guess, pleading guilty to the offense. And there's this argument, and you're hearing different stories, and I think that the fact that we really aren't necessarily privy to everything that happened during this particular incident and don't know all the details. There are reports and allegations that she actually was in possession of the hashish and that it was basically hidden in a specific compartment when she was going over there. And to the extent that it really matters, I'm not so sure. But there's also, I'm sure that she did plead guilty. And there's also reports that she didn't even really know that it was there. It was like done by accident. So I kind of want to, maybe go into discussion. I'm going to go with you, and then I'll hear from Rosa maybe to kind of like, does that really matter? I mean, what about the sentence? I mean, the whole idea is it unfair? The fact that she actually, got the time that she got in trouble to begin with. Do you think that she was being just targeted? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think Brittany may have gotten caught up in a very unique situation that's transpiring across the world today, and especially affecting a lot of Americans. According to the James Foley Foundation, and James Foley, he was a news reporter that was kidnapped and killed in Syria in 2012. But he has a foundation, his family has a foundation where they monitor people that are being detained. And it's amazing that from 2001 to 2005, they say there were just about 4 countries involved in wrongfully detaining U.S. Nationals. And they say that this year alone, that number stands at 19 countries that are involved in detaining people. And, of course, it's for various reasons. Some's for financial gain. Some is trying to get them to change their foreign policies. Some are just trying to make it word that they have some leverage on some other issues, be it related to petroleum or whatever it may be. But I think when we look at just that number itself, that it's really amazing that she just may have kind of fallen into harm's way in a situation of not realizing the changing trends throughout the world as it relates to that. Right. And I think that looking at it and looking at the fact that the other dynamic is that she's a gay woman, that I think that really allowed Russia to be able to just utilize this overall situation for their benefit. And I think that it's just unfortunate. And I think that the amount of time they were attempting to give her was just an attempt to get leverage in order to be able to achieve this. This was a monster that we released, and it goes without saying. Boot was a monster, and according to some 60-Minute reports and some other things, his involvement in the arms dealing and the atrocities in Africa and some of the other things that he was involved in, it's just amazing. I mean, he even had the title of Merchant of Death. And as we just look back on some of the history related to his final arrest by the DEA in Thailand, I mean, it's almost like the scale is just not balanced, considering who she was and what she did, and then what we ended up giving up for her release is something for further discussion, I think.
Right. That is, yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I think that there may be this whole thing where there's a ploy and maybe a move internationally to use these prisoners as a bartering and a brokering situation. I mean, we know. I mean, Russian intelligence is probably one, and I think that we forget about Russia's intelligence and the fact that that's their gang. Russian intelligence has always been top notch, right? And It would be far fetched for me to believe that someone that high profile coming from the United States would have been somebody that they would not have had their eye on. And the fact that, let's just assume she was hiding it, and I'm not saying that she was, I'm quite sure that they knew what she had been doing if she had been going there in the past. It's kind of like coincidental after her going back and forth so many times, and probably going back and forth, with this so-called contraband. They probably knew it, and they knew this was the time to really get her on it. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, at least from my thoughts, because I know how I mean, if you're an American citizen, going to Russia, and Russia, like I said, they're at the top of the food chain when it comes to their intelligence. I would be shocked that they had not known that she had been traveling back and forth, and maybe would have been in possession of something like that to begin with, especially when you hear reports that it might have been in a secret compartment. I don't know if that's true, but at any rate, I think that would have been, um, one way of looking at it. And you're probably right. They knew it was time to get somebody like that. I mean, what do you think about that, Rosa?
I mean, when it comes to this whole issue, I feel like he received 9 years for first offense possessing 0.702 grams, what equals the weight of a paper clip of cannabis oil. And I think that, she was held hostage for this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's perfectly correlated to the agenda that Russia was trying to push, right? They're invading Ukraine because they don't want Ukraine to be a part or acquainted with the West, right? Because they produce people like what they would consider Brittany Griner, right? She was used as a political pawn for being queer, for being black, for being masculine, and for being what they call woke. So that definitely did play into this perfect agenda of continuing to capitalize on why we are intervening in Ukraine. It's because we have the West that produces these types of people that we don't want to have in Russia. And I think that they really did capitalize on all of it by keeping her and holding her hostage, giving her the maximum sentence for, something that they wouldn't have otherwise done with somebody else. But I also think that this whole aspect of this issue really exposes the racism that is still present within the sports industry in the United States. If this were a male, maybe Stephen Curry or another NBA player, they would have might have acted sooner. But because she's black, because she's masculine, because she's queer, and you have all this intersectional racism that is happening within the sports industry that was played upon Brittany, and that's why we have her coming back home. Not right away, but way, after she was convicted in Russia.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think that there's a couple of ways of looking at it. On one hand, especially when you bring up, the fact that, her race and the fact that she was an, LGBTQ community, is that does that make her a more valuable bargaining tool or a less valuable bargaining tool? I don't know. What do you think, Detective Reeves?
Well, I personally feel that you hit the nail on the head in regards to the Russian intelligence and the information that they had. I think her wife had indicated that, she felt that it was kind of a shame, for lack of a better word, the fact that she had to, in the off season, play overseas due to the disparity in the amount of salaries that the NBA players make, the men, and then the WNBA players make, the women. And so a lot of them have to subsidize their income by going overseas. And I'm pretty sure this is not the first time that she was there. It's probably not the first time, like you said, their intelligence was aware that was taking place. But I think that they probably played on the fact that they could do this, do what was considered by the presidential envoy when they of hostage affairs, when they have somebody that they feel is illegally being detained, that would be something that they would start to get the wheels in motion to try to get released. But I personally think that given up this merchant of death in Mr. Boot for Brittany was something that I guess the State Department should have looked at a little closer, even though they said that Russia had just said, we're not giving up what you would like to have in Paul. I just think that sometimes we have to just stop for a moment and say, well, we're going to look at all the atrocities that this person was involved in and all the things that he had done, and being involved in the running of the weapons and being involved in all the things that he instigated in selling of these weapons in Africa and other places. and just being part of these civil wars that took place and made it where men that initially were armed with machetes will now had the AKs and other things to shoot down helicopters and all these other things that he was involved in. It's just, I don't know, the scale to me is just not balanced.
Yeah.
But I'm glad she's home. But I think that it should be an awakening for everyone that's traveling abroad, and especially Americans, and that are traveling to a number of places that are high on the list of those that are, using their power to abduct our citizens or people that may live in America. And since these numbers are definitely growing, that we just have to be cognizant of the fact that we do not need to make ourselves pawns in this game that Russia is playing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think clearly she was. I think what about the argument, and we're going to come back to that. But what about the argument that she was actually, there's this argument that there's other veterans and other military personnel that are actually over there and other, that have not been released before her and have been over there longer. I mean, do you think that is, I don't know whether I should use the word fair, but what do you think about that argument that they should have, the administration should have basically given at least as much attention to trying to get other individuals released as opposed to just focusing, or at least it appeared that they're focusing more on her?
Well, I think that the amazing thing, some of the things that I read is that I think they only have, is it 3 or 4 that are considered wrongfully detained at this time. And, I always wonder what the criteria is exactly for that. But when we look at Russia, we have Paul that's there, and that's the Marine that's there. And we have a guy named Mark Vogel, who's a history teacher from Pittsburgh. He's been detained there since 2021. And his charge was in relationship to having medical marijuana. And he was sentenced to 14 years at a labor camp. And he was never really designated as being wrongfully detained, but it's something that they're wanting to deal with. And then I think there was a lady by the name of Sarah Karabanek, if I'm pronouncing her name right, and she moved there to teach at a private school in Russia, and in 2021 got into a domestic situation with her husband, and she apparently nicked him with a knife in that domestic situation, and she was arrested. And then she was later released, but when she was trying to leave the country, Russia, they detained her again. And so now she's at a holding facility waiting to somehow or another be able to be, released. Mm-hmm. And so they claim that those are the ones that we have there now that are Americans that are in that wrongfully detained status. I would just be curious to see how many they have that may be related to a detained status, but it's related to some criminal offense or some violation of some type of Russian law. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's just the thing that it looks like around the globe, a lot of these countries that have been identified as adversarial to America, and I think some of them that were initiated in one of the reports by the Foley report, I think it was Venezuela. They have detained a number of people. Iran has detained a number of people. Of course, Russia has detained a number of people. Rwanda, and then also Syria. And so in those countries, they all seem like they're looking for pawns to be able to play with the American government for one thing or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, like I said, I think it's a bigger trend, and I think that when it comes to this whole idea of utilizing, I mean, it's not the first time that prisoners have been, and it's kind of interesting because, I mean, we are talking about individuals who allegedly violated laws of a particular country as opposed to someone who is actually being held hostage, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, but now that, for all practical purposes, I think when you're talking about some of these regimes, I think that there's really no difference. And now that we live in such a society where, people are, you know, forced or not forced, but tend to travel more often. And like you said, with these WNBA players who are traveling abroad based upon the fact that they have to go to other countries in order to subsidize their income. You're seeing more of that, and I think we're going to see more of what we saw with the Brittany Griner situation. I think we're going
I'm
to see
afraid
more
so.
of it because I think
I'm
that,
afraid so.
yeah, I mean, and now what you've done is you've kind of told them, for the lack of a better term, now this is how we get down. They're going to say, well, now we got an American, not necessarily hostage. We got someone who, and so now it's easier to bargain with someone who has been, arrested for, an offense, because now it doesn't garner some sort of, international attention that you're violating, some sort of human rights. You got, you have every right to arrest someone in your country who have violated the laws.
Law. That's right.
And now, but they're going to probably, look at U.S. citizens as they come into the country. And, when you're going over there, I mean, you're obviously on their radar. And if they can figure out some way to utilize you as a pawn, then, that can, that's gonna start happening, more often. But I don't know, man. I mean, it's and one of the things that's interesting that comes to, and I have to go there because I'm sure people are going to want me to address this issue. Okay, so now the right, and I'm saying that word loosely because I'm sure there's individuals on both sides of the aisle who are criticizing, because you do have the Marine Paul Whelan who's over there who hasn't been
Hmm.
released. And then there's this whole issue about, Brittany Griner and the fact that in 2020, uh, she vowed not to take the court during the national anthem for the entire season. And now you got someone, and then you got this argument that the individual saying that you're not going to, I mean, I don't know if I want to go there, but let's talk about that. You see where I'm going with that one?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those. I don't know. It depends on how true we want to be in regards to our democracy and the freedom that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we'll have this review of saying this is what you need to do and this is what you should do and this is how you should act, and then on the other say, well, this is a democracy and you have a choice to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we should never get those things mixed up.
Right.
In regards to even thinking about, Colin Kaepernick and the whole issue with him taking a knee. And my thing was, I'm like, well, this is America. And if taking a knee would allow you to address an issue of police brutality and the dysfunctional amount of issues that are happening in law enforcement against people of color and other ethnic backgrounds, then what is with that? There's no disrespect to the flag.
Mm-hmm.
It's disrespect in our mind to the flag.
Right.
But to me, it's more respect because you're having a person that's saying the thing that people fought and died for,
Mm-hmm.
I want us to utilize to look at a situation that's occurring in America that will allow us to maintain our democracy
Mm-hmm.
and maintain our freedom for everyone.
Right.
And so, even with her position, that's the beauty of America.
Right.
We have that freedom.
Mm-hmm. That's true. What do you think about that, Rosa?
I think that's the beauty of Brittany in itself.
You're a little muffled. You're a little muffled.
A perfect political pawn
Mm-hmm.
for Russia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because she is someone that the right not necessarily supports and is not willing to fight for, but she is someone that the left wants to come back. So in seeing people like that, other countries can play on the weaknesses within our system. What divides us, right? We're not going to go out there and rally people for their support in the right if there's somebody that we say violated the rights of another country.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of Republicans that actually came out criticizing Brittany for not following the laws.
Mm-hmm.
And why? Because she's not a white woman, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
she's not a white man.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this whole aspect of like even debating, what does it mean to, uh, for Colin Kaepernick, what he did, it gets us talking. It gets us more divided. And that's what, these dictators and people in these countries want to see, right? They want to divide America further so that they're weak enough so that they can then come in and do whatever it is that they want to do with their own agenda.
Right. I don't know. You know what's interesting about this situation, because I think that, I mean, we have to be able to chew gum and walk at the same time. And and I think that the explanation that I think it's clear that obviously that her being held not as a hostage, but someone who was a prisoner, and that we actually went through a process of bartering her for someone who is being, held, on some serious counts and some serious charges and convicted, and that we decided to release her in order to exchange her for Brittany Griner, who was given this lengthy sentence that was clearly ridiculous for what she was being charged with, right? So,
True.
I mean, so I'm looking at that, but I'm also looking at it from the perspective that as a devil's advocate, and I'm just playing devil's advocate, so I don't want nobody emailing me and calling me and trying to hold me on this. But I'm looking at it, and there are questions when it comes to that. When you have someone that tells you, well, you know what, and clearly it's a political ploy. I mean, we have people, there's people out there, no matter what Biden does, it's not going to be right. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's an opportunity to kind of use it in order to, make Biden look bad and use it as a political, make it a political issue. I guess it is a political issue, but making it, less of an issue about someone who is being held and being released. And looking at that, they're using it, saying, well, he could have used his power more towards a U.S. Marine who is being held over there, and why wouldn't you do that with the same intensity? Why aren't we really talking about that issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you know, let's just assume that this was a timeline. Let's just assume that a Republican was in office and he did the same thing. What do you think the argument would be? Do you think they would be critical if it would have been Trump?
Well, I think given what we've seen in the past, there would be some that wouldn't be critical. They'd hold fast to the banner. But, I think that there is always going to be some room for discussion in regards to, did we have anybody else in captivity here that would have been less of a demon than Boot? Because this guy was responsible for probably thousands of deaths, being the arms dealer that he was, taking part in supporting logistically the rebels in Angola, Sierra Leone, weapons that were later used against British soldiers, taking part in arming the cartel, and giving them weaponry. I mean, had his own little mini, Air Force where he was able to, fly operations in a program that was called AirCess, a small fleet of Russian planes to deliver goods to Africa and Afghanistan. I mean, even a mistake was made by the U.S. government at one point, not realizing through another party that they had allowed him to do some shipments for us,
Mm-hmm.
and was paid for it. And so, this guy, I mean, he was just, I like the word you always use, he was diabolical.
Yeah.
And when you compare the two, man. And
Yeah.
so that's the only thing I would ask the question, that if Putin made that statement that, no, we're only going to give you this one person and not the Marine, then I would have to say, well, there needs to be somebody else in our group that you want, because we need somebody that is on the equal footing in regards to the charges or the offenses or who this person is as far as a detriment to society.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying that from just a personal standpoint of looking at the ledger on paper in front of me. I mean, here I have a person that was just a basketball player, 2009, named the nation's number one high school basketball player, according to Rivals.com. Clearly just an athlete, a citizen, a wife. You know, the two to me is no comparison. And so I don't know if there was nothing else that could have been done.
Right.
But I'd like to have seen, given who this butcher was and this arms dealer was and the atrocities that he had been involved in over a number of years, I would have loved to just seen something maybe different take place.
Right.
Personally.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because like Paul Whelan, I mean, he got 16 years in prison. I think it was in 2000 and maybe 2018 or well, strike that. He was arrested.
Yeah, 2000 June. Yeah, 2020 was. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and so, you know, I mean, it's crazy, and I don't know to the extent that what we could have done. We really need to, you know, we have to. That's something we should definitely keep, because who was in office in 2018? Huh?
Yeah, we have to know. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So who was in office in 2018, Rosa?
Trump?
Right. Am I wrong about that?
No. Mm-mm.
And so who was the Trump's boy in 2018?
So you would think that would have been something that could have gotten worked out.
Right. I mean, his boy. So we got a U.S. Marine that's being held in prison. That's your boy, right? That's your friend, and now
you're having closed door sessions with.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still in custody, and now it makes some sort of, you know, that's some serious hypocrisy, you know, at least from my perspective, that you are now all of a sudden concerned about a Marine that's been in custody, and it was taken into custody about the same time that your boy came into office, and he couldn't negotiate something with his boy. So instead of him doing all this other stuff that he was doing with his boy, he should have been taking care of this Marine. Now, I'm quite sure that, you know, when he it would not surprise me if he would be very critical of Biden on how he handled this situation, right? But at the same time, who's playing politics?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know,
yeah, that's a very valid point.
Right. I mean, it's not like we just found out that they were holding Marines, and when Brittany Griner was taken into custody, we've known they've been holding a Marine. You know, and during this particular time, based upon his relation. So how could you have? The question would be, how could you have such a very cozy relationship with someone who was holding a Marine? You know what I mean? I mean I think that's a serious question. You know, as they're, criticizing the way that the administration was, was dealing with the way that this happened. At least it was dealt with, and I think, you know what I mean. So, you know, that's something that we don't, that we leave out of the conversation. You know what I mean? What you think?
That's a good point, Zulu. I think that's something that will probably be considered as we go forward, and depending on how this is eventually worked out, which I think that it probably will be in a lot of situations. It looks like, reviewing some past cases, they do eventually find some common ground and are able to get, some people released. But
yeah,
I tell you, this thing here overall, I hope that we as American citizens do not forget Paul. And we'll just add that he is a person that enjoys cards, and he enjoys receiving letters of support. And so if you all are, have the wherewithal or think about it, I guess we could probably send whatever to the State Department and to the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. And I know they could probably facilitate those letters or cards to him because I'd read an article where he said he really appreciates those, and it helps him be able to keep his mind and spirits up. And he is a person that has served this country and definitely deserves that.
And I appreciate you saying that, and I think that's something that I hope that the listeners do is try to, try to comfort him, and I think that would be very much appreciated by him, and I think it surely would be appreciated by his family as well. I mean, I'm sure that, that's a long, that's unbelievable. But also one of the things that I also, as I'm looking here, Trevor Reed. Is anybody familiar with him? He was a former Marine from Texas. And I'm reading an article. It was by the Texas Tribune. And it was written April the 27th, 2022. It says Reed traveled to Russia in the summer of 2019 with his Russian girlfriend to learn the language. That August, Russian police arrested him for intoxication and took him to jail to sober up. And they said that Trevor Reed, and they said that he's been detained for 2 years, was freed in a prison swap. President Biden announced Wednesday morning. This would have been back in early 2022.
Yeah, I think it was around April, I think, when they were able to get him released.
Right. And, we don't hear anything about that either.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
And I think he was directly involved also in the release of a guy, I think if I remember, it was like Matt Rich, or, I'll have to look that up. I think it's like Frerichs, but he was being detained in Afghanistan after being there 2 years, and I think he was able to secure his release. And so, there's some good work being done, but I think that I hope and pray, let me just say that we have not seen the tip of the iceberg in regards to what some of these countries are going to try to do with either citizens of the United States or people living in the United States.
Right. And I think that's the bigger question, and I think that's the question that we have to kind of focus on instead of making it a political issue within our country, trying to have a dialogue about, the real implications of what actually happened in this particular situation.
Yeah.
And how clearly this was, it was political, not from the perspective of what was happening with, your boy's old buddy. You know what I mean? And so, that's it's crazy, man. It's crazy the way that they handle this situation. So, what do you think about, on another note, what do you think about the runoff in Georgia between Herschel and his opponent?
Well, I like how he said the people who have spoken.
Right. Warnoff.
And I think that's the beauty of America. And I think, we just have to realize that we are in the greatest nation in the world. But what makes it great is our ability to respect each other, honor the Constitution, and allow us to just have a little love and appreciation for one another, to take care of one another. And that's what makes us great, because it's in our diversity is where our strength has been. Even when we look at all the things that have challenged democracy in the United States, the thing that allowed us to overcome is the ability to have diversity and use what everybody can bring to the table to address any challenges we have as a nation. Right. And, it's always been said that, this nation will only be destroyed from inside out. I don't think the United States will ever be destroyed from outside in.
No.
But the only way that we can do that, and, they say most democracies only last for 200 years, and I think we were at 240. But we have to realize this is a very delicate time in our society,
Right.
and in this experiment that we call democracy.
Right.
And there's not a lot of gray area that we can really play with this. That we have to stand up and be true to what we do. And if you're around people that don't feel that way and willing to honor it, you have to call them out and make them accountable.
Right.
And I think that what we saw in Georgia was a group of people that said, hold on a minute. It's time for accountability.
Right. Yeah. That's true. That's true. I mean, the way that they came out, and man, I was surprised that race was even close. I mean, it just, it's unbelievable, man. And it speaks to, I mean, we're really on that cuff of really either going one way or the other, and it speaks volumes to what people are willing to accept, for what is. I mean, do I want to say I mean, what would be? I mean, come on. I mean, is there anybody that would? And I'm just gonna tell you, as a kid, growing up watching, Georgia play in the SEC and Herschel Walker, and him going to the USFL, him playing in the NFL. I had no idea. I'd never heard the man speak until this time, until this period. And man, that was just something to see, because I'd never heard a politician or anybody that is trying to seek a political office that anybody would even consider. He was so unqualified to have been and I know that there is no necessarily a criteria, but I mean, the fact that you saw, and you're right. I mean, the people, democracy in the final analysis worked in this particular situation by Warnoff actually being the best qualified and probably is going to do the best for this country, both Republicans and Democrat, to be quite honest with you.
That's what I like, yes.
But the fact that we are at this point where we're fighting over, somebody like that, man. I mean, it's just because, I mean, hearing this guy speak, man, I never knew that. I mean, I wish he had never said anything, because it really messed up my image of Herschel Walker, man. Because like I said, I always remembered him as being that, that great running back. And when he entered this race and he got to talking, man, I mean, it was just a sight to see. Yeah, I mean, that was like I mean, you couldn't write that. I mean, if you just imagine if you did a movie and this is what you saw in a movie. Let's just say you somebody wrote this script. I think it would be hard to believe. We'd probably be mad. We'd be boycotting it, saying that why would they try to make a black man look like that?
Well,
but,
I had a little running joke going the other day. They were asking me what I thought about it, and I said, well, I've already received a invitation to attend his party, and I said, and I was considering going dressed as a vampire. Mm-hmm. So I just couldn't believe what he was talking about between vampires and werewolves. That whole thing just blew my mind. I thought, oh my goodness, seriously.
And did you hear his coon statement? He said that basically he says coon's a smart animal. Right? That's I don't know what he's talking about, man. And some of the times I heard him talking, I didn't even know what he said, man.
You just don't know exactly how to take it, but I do take the fact that there are a lot of good people of all races in this country, and I love the fact that when they really stop and think about it, that the people speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
even though it's been a process and we still have a long way to go, I think we'll get there.
I hope we do.
I really feel we'll get there, because there are just so many good people in this country,
right,
that are willing to eventually step up and say, wait a minute, this is not right.
Right.
And sometimes we only see that segment that's trying to overthrow the Capitol, or, trying to not honor, an election, or, and the beauty of it is that so a friend of mine, I don't have a problem with them actually challenging it. But once the judicial system got involved and did the review and gave you the results, then you have to stop for a minute and go, that's why our system is set up the way it is.
Right.
So we can't have dictators.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where, I mean, you can, the way that it's set up, and as we're going back and forth as far as the way at least our own personal vision, for this country. Um, and I know that we basically have not lived up to who we say that we're supposed to be, because I think that we've had a history of certain individuals being disenfranchised, and and that, but I think that there's a couple of ways of looking at it from my perspective, and this is the perspective that I have about America as a country. Now, clearly, the history of this country has been very spotty, and there's been some things that we've done as far as people of color, specifically African Americans, Native Americans, and other people who have been victims of the injustice of this country. I mean, there's without question. But for me, the way I look at America is that who the best of America has come from the oppressed people, right? And that being all of those things that when people are traveling to this country to want part of the American dream is a byproduct of what we went through. It was, and sometimes what annoys me is that we do not recognize. The biggest criticism I have of this country is that we don't recognize sometimes the people that we should recognize. Because oftentimes when you think of people like Dr. King, or even when you think of Malcolm X, or other people who have fought for justice in this country, we almost put them in a category as if they are heroes to Black America. The reality of it is they're the heroes of America.
Yeah, they're heroes of democracy.
Democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And that bothers me. They should be on the front page of that history book, because people come to this country primarily of the Civil Rights Acts, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. The people who benefited the most from, those water hoses, those hangings, the economy of this country. Who did that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And oftentimes, on one hand, as we look at it, there has to be, at least for me, the perspective that there has to be some degree of pride from my perspective, because we don't get the things that we deserve. And I say we, I'm talking about those individuals who fought and struggled for, justice. And when they were fighting for justice, they were not only fighting for justice for themselves, they were fighting for justice for, holding America accountable.
Accountable to what we were supposed to be. That's right.
And so for my thing is that as we look at it, and it's like building a house, right? And if I build this house, then, I don't want that house to be torn down. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's the narrative sometimes that we look at when we think of America, because I think if you look at America from the little vision of a country that was built by, Anglo-Saxons only, then I think you have a very warped view of what America really is. Because if it wasn't for the other people and the oppressed people in this country, America would not be the greatest country in the world. It's the greatest country because of people like us and people of color who basically, sacrificed and made them make it a just society. So when someone asks me, when you make the statement, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are very critical and don't understand that statement, like how could you be loyal to a country that treats you that way? Well, that would be the case if I didn't build this house. Right? So I'm loyal to the house that I built because they didn't build it. We give them way too much credit. They were involved in it, but everybody was. And so, that's kind of the way I look at it when you make that statement. And I talked a little bit about that, on Veterans Day, about, black veterans who fought in every war in this country. To just come home to a country that may not necessarily treat them the way that they should be treated, and many veterans, period, aren't treated the way that they should be treated. But that's kind of the way that I look at it when it comes to the issue about when you talk about us being the greatest nation. Just so I can clarify it for those who may not understand the narrative that we come from.
It is the greatest nation. And I think it's the greatest nation because we have an opportunity to look at things like Georgia and other places that step up and say, we are the people, we have spoken. And it goes back to just the Declaration and who it was founded for, and it was founded for the people.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
As long as we remember that, we will never have any issues, foreign or domestic.
Right.
But we have to remember that.
Last but not least, what about my boy Dion? Huh?
I think that's an opportunity. I think there's an opportunity for a number of young men to be able to grow. Because I think the thing that I liked about what he did is that he really took a number of those young men kind of under his wing. And some of the things that we talked about earlier, too, in regards to what the school was to do with his contract and payment and everything. And sometimes once you have established something, and I know they were showing on SportsCenter the other night that they were comparing his first 3 years to Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney and some of the others. And he was up there in the higher echelon of coaches in the NCAA in their first 3 years, which the move that he's making is something that all of them made based on, the record and the history that they were able to establish at the schools that they were, originally were at. And so you can't really fault him. As long as he continues on with the same mission, then I wish him Godspeed.
Right. What you think about that issue, Rosa, real quick? I want to get your...
I have no...
More on board KCAA's Inland Talk